A single recall notice covered 421,000 vehicles. All were built around the same diesel engine, one that had been sold as a 30% fuel efficiency revolution. Repair costs hit $22,000 per truck. Fleets were grounded. A class action lawsuit was filed within days. The engine that was supposed to secure this company's future became the very thing that destroyed it. But the most damning detail in this entire disaster is this. The warning signs were buried in internal test data years before the first engine ever left the factory floor. 30%. That was the promise. Bold, simple, and impossible to ignore. In ads splashed across industry magazines and primetime TV, the company's new diesel engine was sold as nothing short of a miracle. 30% less fuel consumed, with no sacrifice in power or reliability. Charts showed a sharp drop in operating costs, side by side with rival engines left in the dust. Every press release hammered the same point. This wasn't a marginal improvement. It was a leap. Power with parity, the tagline declared. Efficiency without compromise. Fleet buyers, battered by years of rising diesel prices, heard numbers that sounded almost too good to be true. 30% less fuel meant thousands in savings for each truck every year. For big operators, the math ran into the millions. The message was clear: buy these engines and you'll outpace your competitors. Brochures claimed the design delivered record-breaking miles per gallon, and industry leading uptime. The company's CEO, standing in front of a gleaming prototype at the annual Trade Expo, called it the most significant advance in diesel technology in a generation. The campaign left little room for doubt. Testimonial videos featured drivers praising the smooth power delivery and lower fuel bills. Animated graphs showed a future where fleets ran leaner, cleaner, and cheaper. The 30% figure became a mantra, repeated in sales pitches, dealer meetings, and quarterly reports. Customers lined up, eager to lock in the promised savings before fuel prices climbed any higher. The company's stock soared on the back of these claims, with analysts touting the engine as the answer to tightening emissions rules and brutal market competition. But behind every confident number and glossy ad, the promise hovered like a dare. 30% less fuel, no penalty in performance, no hidden trade-off. The company didn't just sell an engine, it sold certainty. And in the world of heavy-duty diesel, certainty is worth its weight in gold. That is what made the coming betrayal so devastating. Long before the promise of a miracle engine, the company's name stood for something solid. For decades, it was the backbone of freight and transit, its engines powering everything from cross-country haulers to city buses. Dealers and fleet managers spoke of it with a kind of reverence. Contracts were measured not in years but in generations, grandfathers who would run the same badge on their rigs as their sons and grandsons. In the annual reports, the numbers told a story of quiet dominance. Nearly half of all long-haul trucks on American highways carried the company's engines under their hoods. Repeat orders from the largest logistics firms were a given, not a goal. Service networks stretched from coast to coast, with parts delivered overnight and technicians on call for every possible breakdown. The company's reliability was not just marketing, it was a lived reality for the fleets that depended on uptime. When a trucker said he would run it to 1,000,000 miles, he meant it. Warranty claims ran well below the industry average. In trade publications, the company's engines were praised for their durability, easy rebuilds, and a kind of mechanical honesty that inspired loyalty. Institutional pride ran deep. Engineers boasted of designs refined over decades, parts catalogs that read like family trees, and a customer base that trusted them to deliver year after year, contract after contract. When new emissions rules or fuel spikes hit, buyers waited to see how this company would answer. For many, it was not just a supplier, it was a partner in survival. That deep well of trust, built over lifetimes, would soon be tested in ways no one inside the company could imagine. Deadlines arrived with the force of law. In October 2005, the EPA issued new heavy-duty diesel requirements, a strict 0.2 grams of nitrogen oxides per brake horsepower hour and a 30% cut in particulate emissions, all by 2010. The calendar was not negotiable. For Detroit Diesel, the clock started ticking the moment those rules hit the Federal Register. Every quarter shaved from development mattered. Competitors moved fast. Cummins announced its X15 for 2007, already certified to the new standards, while Volvo's D13 promised compliance and reliability out of the gate. Fleet managers watched, calculators in hand, as the price of diesel leapt from $1.85 to over $4 per gallon in just 5 years. Each spike sent buyers back to the spreadsheets, hunting for any edge in fuel economy. The pressure on Detroit's leadership was relentless. Lose the emissions race and risk being locked out of entire states, arrive late to market, and watch loyal customers defect to rivals with engines that could legally cross California's borders. Internal cost curves showed the danger clearly. Every month of delay meant millions in lost orders, and every failed certification risked warehouses full of unsellable engines. Boardroom meetings grew tense as regulatory calendars were stapled to sales forecasts. The CEO's signature on the zero-defect commitment bound the company to a launch date that left no room for error, or for the full battery of endurance tests engineers had requested. The urgency was real, and it drove decisions at every level. The company's future depended on beating the clock, even if it meant rewriting the rules for what counted as tested or ready. The gamble was that speed would win the race, and that any rough edges could be smoothed out after launch. In that crucible, shortcuts were not just possible, they became inevitable. On the drawing boards, the new diesel engine looked like a marvel. Engineers packed a high-pressure common rail fuel system into a block that was both lighter and stronger than its predecessors. The heart of the design was a compacted graphite iron block, chosen for its ability to withstand immense combustion pressures while trimming nearly 12% off the engine's dry weight. This material, rarely used in heavy-duty diesels at the time, promised the strength of cast iron, with the flexibility needed for thinner walls and tighter tolerances. Every pound saved meant more payload for customers and a shot at the coveted power-to-weight crown. The fuel system was another point of pride. By pushing rail pressures as high as 2,200 bar, over 32,000 pounds per square inch, the engine could atomize diesel more finely, wringing extra power and efficiency from every drop. This was no off-the-shelf setup. Engineers integrated a dual-stage turbocharger with a variable geometry exhaust manifold, aiming to deliver both instant low-end torque and sustained high-speed output. Patent filings boasted of a system that could adapt on the fly, minimizing turbo lag and keeping emissions in check even under heavy load. Subsystems were tightly integrated. The cooling circuit wound through the block and head in a new configuration, designed to handle the higher thermal loads without adding bulk. Electronic controls governed injection timing, turbo boost, and exhaust aftertreatment, all coordinated by a central ECU. The goal was to meet stricter emissions rules, without sacrificing the durability that customers expected. On paper, the numbers dazzled. 15% less fuel consumed, 30% lower lifetime emissions, and a 25% boost in specific output. The architecture was so compact that it freed up space for larger alternators or hybrid modules down the line. But every innovation raised the stakes, pushing pressures higher, shaving weight, and layering in new electronics meant the margin for error shrank. The complexity demanded a level of validation and endurance testing that had never been more critical. Yet as the project advanced from concept to prototype, the clock kept ticking, and the pressure to deliver mounted with every passing quarter. Dealer showrooms became ground zero for the campaign. Sales managers received glossy binders packed with talking points, side-by-side fuel cost calculators, and a mandate from headquarters: move units, no excuses. Internal memos warned that inventory allocations for next year would depend on how many of the new diesels each dealer could push out the door. The pressure rippled outward. Regional sales directors held weekly contests tracking which franchise could sign the most fleet contracts or convert the most loyal customers to the new engine. Investor calls sounded more like pep rallies than earnings briefings. The CEO spoke of a once-in-a-generation pivot, urging shareholders to picture a future where the company wasn't just surviving the regulatory crunch, but dominating it. Slide decks flashed projections of double-digit revenue growth, all riding on the diesel's launch. Analysts repeated the company's claims in glowing research notes, calling the engine the cornerstone of a new era. The message was hammered home. The entire business was now staked on this single product. Every department felt the heat. Engineering was told that success is not optional. The marketing team tripled its ad spend, flooding trade shows and industry journals with the 30% promise. Even the legal department braced for a surge in contracts and warranty registrations. The company's annual report dedicated 12 pages to the engine, more than any other product in its history, while the risk disclosures quietly ballooned with fine print about unforeseen technical challenges. Dealers, investors, and employees were all swept up in the momentum. The engine wasn't just a product, it was a lifeline. The irony, of course, was lost in the noise. The more the company bet on its miracle, the more exposed it became to the first sign that miracle might not arrive. On January 14, 2026, a Silverado 2500 HD rolled into a dealership with its engine frozen solid at just under 60,000 miles. The service log called it a catastrophic loss of oil pressure. Mechanics pulled the pan and found metal shards, the telltale sign of a failed oil pump drive gear. The warranty claim hit the company's system that same afternoon, one red flag among thousands of routine repairs. But this one did not fade into the background. Within days, a test cell manager quietly filed an internal report linking the failure to the same gear material flagged for fatigue risk years earlier. The memo landed on a director's desk with a warning. Under repeated high-load towing, the gear could shear, starve the crankshaft, and destroy the engine in seconds. 2 weeks later, on April 2nd, 2026, an internal engineering memo surfaced. It acknowledged a design flaw, citing lab data that showed gear fractures under sustained torque cycles. The document, never meant for public eyes, admitted that the risk was known as far back as 2015, when a whistleblower engineer had flagged abnormal wear during a 10,000-hour durability run. At the time, managers labeled it non-critical, banking on the projected failure rate staying below 0.2%. That gamble would prove costly. Inside the company, the tension was palpable. Test cell logs began to show clusters of premature failures, but each was handled as an isolated case. No recall, no public admission, just a growing stack of warranty claims and a quiet hope that the numbers would hold. The whistleblower, now outside the company, later testified that management weighed the odds and chose to accept the risk, betting that most engines would survive long enough to avoid a scandal. But the failures kept coming, and each one chipped away at the illusion of certainty the company had sold so confidently. The first alarms had sounded. The decision to press on, despite the evidence, would shape everything that followed. A failed engine tells its story in metal fragments and burnt gaskets. Independent laboratories, brought in as warranty claims piled up, began with the basics: a teardown of the block and a sweep for clues in the debris. The first finding was always the same. Gasket material was pressed far beyond its design limit, the imprint of combustion pressure etched deep into the fire ring. Pressure mapping revealed spikes that should have been impossible, with localized stress climbing to 6.2 megapascals against a material rated for 4.8 megapascals. The culprit was not just brute force, but a perfect storm of design shortcuts. Thinner walls meant to save weight. A new alloy that never reached its full tensile strength because of a rushed heat treatment cycle. Metallurgical analysis showed a 20% drop in yield strength, traced to incomplete tempering. In cross-section, the block's grain structure looked coarse, riddled with micro cracks that acted as stress concentrators. The gasket failures triggered a chain reaction. Once the seal broke, coolant flooded into cylinders, oil thinned, and friction spiked. In several units, the camshaft journals showed scoring from metal-on-metal contact, a sign that lubrication had failed in seconds. Digging deeper, laboratory technicians found evidence of timing drift. ECU logs recorded injector pulses advancing up to 4 degrees before top dead center, pushing peak combustion pressure well above safe limits. This was not a fluke. Firmware bugs in the fuel system caused erratic injection events, magnifying the mechanical strain. The result was a cycle of overstress, heat, and fatigue that no gasket or alloy could survive. Every piece of evidence pointed to the same conclusion. What looked like isolated failures were the predictable outcome of a system driven past its breaking point by choices made long before the first engine left the line. On April 12, 2026, recall notices landed in the inboxes of thousands of fleet owners. For some, the warning came too late. One operator, running a dozen trucks on tight margins, watched his entire business unravel after 3 engines failed within a month. The repair invoice for just one truck, $22,000, was enough to wipe out a year's profit. His drivers, stranded on the side of the interstate, waited hours for tows that never seemed to come. Contracts slipped away, insurance premiums soared, and the phones rang with angry customers demanding answers he did not have. Across the country, the numbers told a story of quiet devastation. The recall covered 421,000 vehicles. By the time the dust settled, 3,360 catastrophic events had been logged. Engines seized or caught fire. Rigs were left immobile in the middle of a delivery. The official failure rate, 0.80%, sounded small on paper. In reality, it meant more than 3,000 families facing lost wages, more than 3,000 companies scrambling to replace a truck that was supposed to last a decade. Each breakdown triggered a cascade of costs: towing, lost freight, emergency rentals, and weeks of downtime. For the company, every incident became a line item on the balance sheet, a mounting liability that no amount of marketing spin could erase. The damage did not stop with the fleets. Warranty claims flooded the system, each one a record of broken trust. The recall, meant to contain the fallout, only confirmed what customers already knew. The engine designed to save them had become an anchor, pulling everyone down with it. The company scrambled to stem the bleeding. Engineers rushed out a reinforced head gasket, touting it as a permanent fix. Stronger material, higher clamping force, a promise that the worst was over. Service bulletins ordered mechanics to retrofit engines in the field, sometimes in freezing truck stops or sun-baked yards. At headquarters, legal teams drafted a new warranty: 18 months or 60,000 miles, whichever came first. The hope was simple: buy time, slow the tide of claims, and reassure the fleets that their investment could still be salvaged. But the fixes fell short. The new gaskets failed at nearly the same rate as the originals. Redesigned parts arrived late, often lacking the testing data that would give customers confidence. Mechanics reported that the root problem, Combustion pressures spiking beyond design limits remained unsolved. By spring, the company faced a wall of angry owners and a flood of paperwork. On April 25, 2026, a class action lawsuit landed in federal court, representing 250,000 truck owners. Plaintiffs' lawyers cited hundreds of thousands of catastrophic failures, accusing the company of knowingly selling a defective product and covering up internal warnings. Cash reserves evaporated under the weight of warranty payouts and legal costs. Suppliers demanded payment up front. Dealers, once the backbone of the brand, began to drop their franchises. In boardrooms and courtrooms, executives watched as the company's last hope, the engine meant to secure its future, became the anchor that pulled it under. When the factory gates closed for good, the lesson was written in every unpaid invoice and every stranded truck. There is no shortcut around engineering failure and no fix for broken trust. Today, every recall, every $22,000 repair invoice stands as proof. When ambition overtakes caution, even giants can fall by their own hand. Under pressure, corners were cut, warnings ignored, trust shattered on a scale measured in hundreds of thousands of stranded trucks. The lesson endures. Engineering shortcuts may buy time, but the bill always comes due. The real cost is trust, and once lost, it rarely returns.